Hello and welcome to episode 49 of the TRUUMAN Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Paddy Crump. Paddy, thank you for being with me. How are you doing?
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm doing really well. How about you?
Amazing. Yes, doing very well. It's Friday. The sun is shining. Cannot complain. So, Paddy, as always, going to start with a tough one because you'll let the audience know in a little bit why this one might be a bit more trickier for you. But in your own words, what makes you a man?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about it. It's quite difficult given I don't even feel like a man. I'm only 19, so it's been something I've kind of grappled with throughout my life, being like a male, being a teenage teenager, and being a boy. I grew up playing a lot of rugby, so I was in male environments, um, and I never really conformed to um, what the kind of macho behavior or kind of male masculine characteristics. But I think for me now, being a man is just living how I want to live, living authentically and being me, um, and kind of just not worrying too much about fit into a fit into a kind of defined stereotype, and just being happy. And I'm incredibly comfortable with who I am and my masculinity now. But there are times growing up where it was a real struggle for me.
It's that authentic self is pretty much what I'm trying to encourage. I think it's you're wise before your years. Let's put it that way to say that that's the sentence that's come out of your mouth. So yeah, that's good. It's the right way to be. Well, in my opinion, obviously there's no right way. So Paddy, why don't you tell us a little bit about what it is that you're currently doing, what it is that you're campaigning for, and why I invited you on.
Yeah, so I'm a mental health campaigner. I've struggled with OCD and anxiety since I was 13. Um, so I've tried to use that to kind of, I find mental health campaigning quite cathartic. Having struggled for 6 years, I kind of look back before I started campaigning with a lot of regret and shame with what I've been through. So I decided to try and use it for um, a positive thing. So I spent the last couple of years campaigning. I've done a lot of work around early intervention, um, making sure those who need support can get support when they need it most. And recently started trying to campaign around getting a mental health minister. So at the moment, there is um, a minister who looks after mental health, but they also look after patient safety and women's health, which I think is completely inadequate. Um, so I've been campaigning around that issue, trying to pressure the government into appointing a full-time cabinet minister for mental health, um, alongside of a work around kind of destigmatizing mental health, trying to get people to talk about mental health more, destigmatizing medication, mental health medication. So yeah, lots going on.
Amazing. A lot to unpick and a lot to talk about, which I'm excited for. Some meaty conversations to be had. I guess let's start with the important thing for you, which is, and for me, it's quite new, and I don't fully understand it. So, can you explain what OCD is?
Yeah, it's very complex and everybody struggles differently. I only really started kind of defining it as OCD recently, but I know that I've had it since I was 13, so I've had counselling since I was 13. And it's kind of a combination between obsessive thoughts and compulsions, and the compulsions often come from the obsessive thoughts. So an example that I have is I am kind of germ phobic. So leading up to COVID, it was worse, and during COVID, so I'd constantly be thinking that my hands had COVID on them, had germs on them, so I'd have to wash my hands all the time until they bled. Um, I'd have to um, kind of wear a mask everywhere. even kind of around the streets where nobody was, because I was convinced and I was obsessing about me having COVID. There's probably not been a week in the last 4 years where I've not thought I'd had COVID. It's just my mind can convince me of anything, basically. I think the most accurate statement I've seen around OCD is OCD can make you literally believe that you don't have OCD. It's kind of like I find a lot about false memories, and I'll keep obsessing over events that have happened. So a lot of my OCD is around guilt. So I'll lie awake worrying that I've offended somebody if I've said something, and then the compulsion is to apologize. So a lot of it comes around, if I feel like I've interrupted somebody, I have to say, "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you," every time. And another thing that not many people are aware of is a thing called confessional OCD. So if I feel like I've done something, even just knocked in somebody or brushed somebody, I have to apologize and tell them that I've done it, which it's like an itch that I can't scratch. If I don't do it, I have to say something, otherwise I just can't think of anything else, which is where the obsessions come in.
It's interesting, almost like a tick, sort of similar to
Yeah,
Tourette's, where you just have to, the thought
yeah,
make.
yeah, exactly. That's what I've. It's a comparison that some people make, because obviously I could not say it, but my mind just would not be able to move on if I didn't say what I felt I needed to say. I'd just not be thinking about things, and it often comes around points where I like, if I am going somewhere and I know that I really want to enjoy it, it comes around then when there's a lot of pressure on an event. I remember I had a point where like flushing toilets and turning taps off was a big OCD kind of trigger for me. And I went to a international rugby match, and for the first half, all I could think about was whether I flushed the toilet. When I knew that I had flushed the toilet, I saw it with my own eyes that I flushed the toilet, but my mum was telling me that I hadn't flushed the toilet, and I just couldn't get that out of my mind. It would be, somebody went in straight after me, so they would have flushed the toilet. It was just completely irrational.
Yeah, it's that yeah, that's probably the best way of describing it, is that irrational thought process. So what, I guess the obvious thing to that is that's naturally going to feed into anxiety, which you also said
Yeah.
that you suffered with. So explain sort of the spiral of that process.
Yeah, so a lot of it's about um, kind of the germ and the and COVID. So I'll stress about, or I think, oh, I have COVID. The OCD will tell me I've touched my phone or touched a banister which somebody could have touched, had COVID, and then the anxiety will build before, say, I have something on or come into work. The anxiety will build, and like have a physical effect. I'll become quite shaky, and hot, and really become stressed about an event coming up and going out the house. And then sometimes when I'm out, the anxiety just reaches a level where I just can't bear it, so I have to leave. And it's kind of the OCD leads to the anxiety, and the anxiety makes the OCD worse. So it's just a spiral till until I just can't go out. And it's got a lot better since 2020. But that's when it kind of hit the peak of its powers over me.
Yeah, so COVID was obviously a big trigger for it, which I don't blame you. There was obviously a lot of scare around the whole thing. So if you have just even a subtle tendency to it, I'm sure it's going to magnify it. You talked about counselling, which is something that you've been doing since you were 13, but maybe taking a step back and looking at early signs. Is there anything that you can sort of pinpoint for people that might start to look at like early signs towards OCD?
Yeah, I think just being unable to take your mind off something, even though somebody says it's not the end of the world. Well, for me with OCD, it is the end of the world. It's not like it can't just disappear with a comment. And I think the anxiety, I still get it now, and I thought it was normal at the time, but if a phone rings, I instantly worry that somebody my family's in trouble, or it's a doctor's telling my family that they're not very well or something like that. So it's just little things that I thought was normal growing up. The constant guilt around things, and feeling like I had to say things. I remember I used to go into my mum's room at night, and then I'd have to like a confessional where I'd have to tell her what I felt guilty about in that day, and my mum would say, "Oh, what do you feel bad about today?" And then it kind of eased the anxiety, and it was a relief to speak to her. But then when I started, then that kind of stopped working. So that's when I realized I needed more help to get a counselor. But yeah, it's just little signs when I think it's hard because you're not really taught about mental health and mental health conditions growing up. So it's very hard to know what's normal and what's not normal. But it was helpful. My parents had experience with mental illness, so they kind of helped pick up on it.
So you talked about the speaking with your mum and that sort of easing it, and then obviously going into counselling. Are there any other sort of tips or things that you do that can help you sort of deal with your OCD?
Yeah, I think a lot of my OCD is around the past and regretting things, and I try. I'm not religious, but I try and kind of talk to myself and say that everything happens for a reason. Kind of, it helps me like a butterfly effect. So have you heard the story of the Chinese farmer?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
that's yeah. So shall I just run through it?
yeah, please, yeah,
So people tell it in different ways. But there's a farmer, and he farms a strip of land at the end of a bigger farm, and he needs this strip of land um, to to sustain himself and his son. And he has one horse that farms the land, and one day the horse runs away, and everybody from the village comes around and says, "Ah, that's so unlucky, that's so unfortunate." And the farmer says, "We'll see." And so the next day, the horse comes back with four other wild horses. Um, and again, in the evening, everybody comes around and says, "Oh, that's so lucky, that's so fortunate." And the farmer says, "We'll see." And then the next day, his son is out riding one of the horses, trying to break it in, and it bucks him off, and he falls off and breaks his leg. And everybody comes around and says, "Oh, that's so unlucky, that's so unfortunate." And he says, "We'll see." And then the next day, conscription officers come round and are signing up everybody for the army who's an able-bodied young man. And obviously, the son is got a broken leg, so he can't be signed up. So everybody from the village comes around and says, "That's so lucky." And the farmer says, "We'll see." So that's kind of how I try and think of things in my life now. Like, I try and think I'm worrying about this or worrying about doing that, but it could lead to something better in the future. And I can't say for certain now that it's going to be a negative thing that I've stressed out about that. So that's how I look at, that's how I get kind of try and get through some of the obsessions about the past and obsessions and around the germs and that kind of thing. The best way, obviously, talking to my counselor helped a lot, and I'm on medication. But the best way I kind of found to get out, I wasn't on medication when I came out of COVID. And at my worst, my OCD, I didn't really want to live anymore. I was kind of not leaving the house. My parents had to stay in the room with me while I went to bed and fell asleep because I just couldn't be left on my own because I was just driving myself mad. And I kind of, the way I got through it is I kind of thought about what I wanted to achieve in the future, and kind of I looked at all my goals and what I wanted to do. And I said to myself, if I'm gonna, like, the world is gonna change and the world has to carry on, and if I want to achieve all these things in my life, then I'm gonna have to get out and get out and start pushing myself. So I started pushing my boundaries a little bit. And I was in year 11 at school, the year after COVID hit. So I needed to get out and do GCSEs, and I did miss some time off school, but I knew that this is kind of a now or never. If I don't get my GCSEs, then I'm going to struggle in the future. So for me, it was kind of coming out the lowest point was I was only able to get through that by talking to my counsellor and then setting myself these goals and knowing I had to start doing something to achieve these goals, which really helped.
It's doing is the best thing, right? Whether
Mm,
it's OCD or any other form of mental health. For me, I find it's the best medicine. And I think just to link it back to the podcast is that for men as well, I think
mm,
women deal with mental health in different ways. I think genuinely one of the best things that a man can do is start doing something. And the way that you articulated the future is really important. I think it's like you need to look at what that's going to look like and start to make steps towards that, no matter how small they are. So yeah, well done for
mm,
getting out of arguably one of the darkest places a man can
yeah,
be. So all credit to you on that sense.
thank you.
One thing that I guess we have in common is the cathartic side to what we do. Obviously, yours is campaigning, mine is podcasting. Again, a lot out of this conversation, which is great for me. But yeah, let's delve into that a little bit more and see where we go with that. So,
Mm,
I guess the first place is schools, right? And talking about
yeah.
mental health. What do you think's missing?
I think one of the early kind of the biggest things is just education around mental health. As I said earlier, growing up, when I was 13, I didn't know that what I was feeling wasn't normal. Um, and I just don't think that's right, that young people don't really know about mental health and mental illness until they kind of come into contact with it, or they are are pulled aside and spoken to about it. So I think if you start normalizing mental health and mental illness from a very early age, then it becomes normal. It's not a stigmatized subject. It's not a taboo to talk about. If you start talking about your feelings at primary schools, then I think that's a point where young people and children are learning so much, and they haven't learned yet that mental health in the society as a whole is kind of not really talked about and has this stigma attached to it. So we have a great opportunity at schools to be able to change that in young people. Um, and so I think education um, around mental health is so important, just to A, normalize it, and B, people will be able to pick up on what's happened to them, and if their friends are struggling, so much easier, which would help early intervention. It would help stop people from getting to the point where they need more help. Um, so that's one of the things around schools, and another, I think, teacher training around mental health and mental health first aid so important. I had bad experiences at school where I was told that I was too sensitive, and I was kind of shamed in front of a class by teachers. And I think teachers are under a lot of pressure at the moment, but I think they feel a lot more comfortable. And surveys are showing that teachers do want more training around mental health, because it's not fair on teachers if somebody comes to them to ask about their mental health or to talk to them or open up, that it's not fair that teachers don't have the training to know what to say in that situation, because it's an enormous amount of pressure to have a young child come to you and talk about, say, they're feeling depressed, they might be self-harming. Teachers have got to be able to kind of feel confident to know what to say in those situations.
I think with teachers, it's a tricky one, isn't it? They're already extremely stretched and
Mm,
extremely stressed and probably extremely underpaid as well.
yeah.
And yeah, it's how do they deal with that and how do you
Mm,
equip? Or is it a third party? Is it another sort of employee that is there? But yeah, it's definitely a conversation that should be had, and yeah, first mental health first aid training is probably the simplest step to that, right? It's probably step one
yeah.
to that. Um, I guess one of the questions that I'll ask is around the I guess weaponization of mental health and mental health words. So obviously yourself, you are suffering from a legit condition that is being treated through medication and counselling and has put you through extreme turmoil.
Mm.
But what we are seeing is maybe a number of people gaming the system, shall we say? It's probably the easiest way of saying it, because those words are easy to say, that I'm feeling depressed or I'm feeling anxious, when it might be a case that it's just you're going through natural stresses of school. What's the answer there, or isn't there?
I think it's so difficult because, well, one of my biggest frustrations, somebody who struggles with OCD, is people saying I'm a little bit OCD, or it's my putting something straight and saying it's my OCD, because it's completely different. OCD, there's no pleasure in OCD. The feeling you feel when you put something straight, or I kind of switch a light off or switch a switch, is relief rather than any happiness or joy. But I think that comes from more misunderstanding around OCD rather than actual kind of maliciousness. But it's such a difficult one around people gaming the system, because I think you're always going to have that. You have it through physical health, illnesses, and it's kind of something that I've noticed recently that a lot of politicians have used around the Conservative Party in their last kind of year of government, talking about changing the benefit system, and kind of saying that people are over diagnosing just normal day-to-day challenges. That I think it's pretty much impossible to define and to split those people who are really struggling and those people who aren't. And I think the vast majority of people are actually struggling. And I think it comes from just more societal education around like what actually is mental illness, what's just mental health, because a lot of people use those two interchangeably, but it's very different. Like everybody has mental health, everybody struggles. Sometimes everybody struggles with mental health at some points, but less people have a mental illness. So I think there needs to be more education, and if there's more resources and more people out there to support people who say they're struggling, then it would be a lot easier to kind of stop anybody from saying they're struggling, because they wouldn't be struggling as much. So I think, yeah, it's pretty impossible, but I think a way to kind of prevent it is just educating society as a whole a lot more.
Do you think that sort of leads to the description of things? So I'll give you an example. I've actually never been to a medical profession with any of the stuff that I've been going through. So obviously had suicidal thoughts and had quite severe panic attacks, potentially anxiety attacks. It's like, again, I'm being careful with my words because of that, and it's maybe that's it. Maybe I shouldn't have said I've had anxiety attacks, because I'm not too sure, but I've definitely had panic attacks in scenarios. And maybe is that something that could be sort of utilized? Maybe is like a more rigid definition or a more rigid understanding of what they look like.
I do, but I started counselling when I was 13, but didn't get diagnosed at that point. But and I didn't call it OCD, but I knew that there was something different. And the difficulty is, if in a perfect world, I think yes, you would get a diagnosis, but people are waiting years to see anybody about their mental health or mental illness, and the actual waiting list to get diagnosed is so long that a lot of people just kind of think stuff it and don't bother. And not everybody who struggles with the mental health and struggles with mental illness reacts well to a more medicalized diagnosis. Some people don't feel like they need diagnosing. Some people don't need that. But if you know that you've struggled And when I started campaigning, I didn't I've never used any NHS services until I started on medication recently, and I felt quite a big imposter in the mental health space. I didn't feel like I deserved to be there, but kind of how I look at it is I know the struggles that I've been through. I struggle on a daily basis, and I think that's enough. It's about reconciling that within me that I can say, yeah, I've been through that, and I want to go out and help others. So I think it's hard to kind of do a one size fits all, but you know in your head that what you've been through, and I don't think a label on that should change anything really. It's more about your actual experience rather than just a word.
Yeah, I get that, but I guess that's sort of what leads into the you can't define a feeling, right? So it's a case of
Yeah,
this is this is how I feel and this is how it's affected me, which I get, right? Like everyone deals with things differently, and when I first started talking about it, that was something I was really cautious about saying was what tipped me over the edge is irrelevant because your
yeah,
threshold is different, and I think that again is something that people don't understand. Like maybe a teacher might have gone through the worst crap in their life and just don't understand that someone can feel pressure from certain things. So there's that I think is probably really important is is having some empathy around that and just sort of saying that everyone's breaking point is different. I think that's probably a nice balance. You're right. It's a tough field to crack, but there's no harm in education, and there's no harm in uh, allowing conversations like this to happen in schools and at a younger age. I don't think there's. I think there's only going to be there's more the benefits outweigh the negatives. I think is probably
yeah,
the just to it. One thing that you mentioned right at the beginning, which I'm also a big fan of, is sort of proactiveness rather than sort of reactiveness, and sort of campaigning for that as well. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that and what that looks like?
yeah. So I'm a big supporter of early intervention. Um, I managed to get counselling when I hit my crisis point, and I'm incredibly fortunate. I don't know if I'd be here without that support at that point. So I'm trying to campaign for those people who either have hit that point, not got the support, or don't have a voice to to talk about it, because I don't want anybody to go through what I went through alone. So I've done a lot of work around the funding the hub, so a early intervention support hub in each town, so every young person has access to support hubs where they could walk in without a referral and talk to a professional about their mental health, about what's going on. In an ideal world, it would cover a whole range of things, including like sexual health, drug support, that kind of thing. Um, and that kind of, for me, is to stop the molehill from turning into a mountain. The earlier you can get to something, the earlier you can assess what's going on, the earlier you can identify what's going wrong and put it right, is the better. I look at it. If you had a broken arm and you waited 6 months to set it, it would not heal right. Whereas if you can get to early intervention, you can get to people who are struggling at the very start, then it can save you a lot of it can save a lot of pain and a lot of money for the NHS and a lot of time in the long run. But it's incredibly frustrating because we've campaigned for this as a coalition of charities campaigning for it, and to be fair, all the parties put it in their manifesto, a support hub in some way or another, but I can't see it happening in the next 5 years, probably 10 years, just because it's very hard to quantify early intervention, how many people it saved, whereas other funding other things in the NHS, you can directly see how many people an ambulance has saved, or you can see how many people have got a new hip, where you can't just there's no number to put on how many people have been saved by going and seeking early intervention. But yeah, so I'm gonna keep campaigning on that, because early intervention will help people who are struggling from the lower end of the scale to the upper end of the scale, and done properly, then early intervention can be a form of suicide prevention.
Yeah. That was going to be my argument, is if you can get the suicide numbers to drop, then you've proved that it's
Yeah. That the issue that I think with that politicians won't do is, by early intervention now, those numbers will probably only drop 2, 3, 4 years down the line. And the way that I think a lot of like the political parties view at the moment, they're focusing on the next 6 months and winning the next election, which is a very short term mentality. But nothing's going to change unless we look at mental health as a long term project.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I know you and I could have a very long chat around
Yeah,
political issues, but that's a podcast for another day, I think. But yeah, there's definitely need for change. I think on the other side as well. So looking at mental illness and looking at mental health, I also think early intervention is really important. I think building resilience and having an understanding of ebbs and flows of life and how to deal with things, and working on yourself is something that's missing. It was something that was missing for me. It was one of the reasons that I got into the position that I did. So yeah, I can see the benefit for early intervention in any way, shape, or form. It's just
yeah,
quantifying it, which when it comes to implementing it into businesses, implementing it into politics, or asking for money, is very hard to sort of justify it in that sense. But I guess the more people like you and I that talk, the more it shows that it does, right? So
yeah.
it's I think more conversations is probably the way to showcase it. Um, let's talk about medication, because there is a lot of stigma around it for a number of illnesses. I never went down the medication route. It's something that really want to try and avoid and never really want to um, do, but that's personal preference. And I do know that there are points and times where people need it. So yeah, let's talk about that. What is the current stigma around mental health medication?
I think it's huge. I was very resistant for a long time. I've only just started on medication. And for me, it was kind of a feeling that the counselling had failed. I felt like I was letting my counsellor down because, like, I'm looking for other things. It was a feeling that there is something properly wrong with me, because in my own head I could justify counselling as just, I'm just talking about my problems. It's not a medical thing. Um, it's not something that's actually wrong. It's just, I'm just talking. Whereas by starting on medication, it was kind of an acknowledgement that there is like something actually wrong with me. Whereas I think a lot of people there's like say, oh, there's nothing wrong if you're like, but there is if you're taking medication, in my mind. Um, and just think nobody talks about I didn't get told. I spoke to the doctors and um, I got it prescribed very quickly, but I didn't know anything about mental health medication. I didn't really know what was available. I didn't know the process of getting it. And what I found, people a lot more open to talking about therapy, and you see therapy on TV shows and that kind of. I can't remember a TV show that I've seen where, or in anything in the media, where I'm on sertraline, so somebody takes sertraline. So that, yeah, it's very hushed. I think it's starting to change a bit with Dr. Alex has done a lot of work around kind of trying to remove the stigma of post your pill day on the first day of each month. And that I've shared that, and I've posted about it, but even that took me a while to kind of admit to it. Um, but not even admit to it makes it sound like it's something wrong. At the time I did feel it was a really big step, and I put off ringing the doctors for a long time. for it because of the stigma. But I found it really, really helpful. And it won't work for everybody, but it's something out there which I think I've really found useful, and I'm glad I did it. But it's frustrating that there's such a stigma around it. That even me, who I've shared a lot, I've shared all my struggles kind of online and in parts of the media, and even I struggled to kind of ring the doctors and ask for medication.
It's interesting because there's also an argument for the ease in which doctors prescribe it. So I've done a number of podcasts on that side as well, where it's like looking at medication as a final option, which is definitely something it sounds like you've done. Is it wasn't your first decision. I'm of the believer that that's the right way to do it. I don't think medication should be the first resort. I think it should be the last resort, essentially. To use your example of something else, blood pressure tablets are something that older people take. There are obviously other ways of reducing your blood pressure well before you become sort of dependent on blood pressure tablets. So you should potentially try those first and see where they go. And also, as you said, there's a chance that those tablets don't work and you have to look at other things as well. So yeah, it's an interesting one for me because I'm really focused on that sort of first stage of that, like resilience building and preempting and starting to build your mental health. But then on the other side of the coin, which I think is really important, which we've probably not touched on enough, is the difference between mental health and mental illness. Like if you
Mm,
have a diagnosed illness and you're dealing with a professional and you're going through steps and steps and steps, then eventually medication does sort of become the option, right?
yeah, yeah, I think so. I think you're totally right. It's not a long-term thing. I'm not going to be on medication for the rest of my life. I think it's important that that's kind of explained to people when they're assessing the options, that medication should probably be a last resort. And it's not, it, I don't think it works on its own, medication, because medication won't, it's not there to get rid of my OCD. It's there to kind of help me manage my OCD, and I can only help manage it and kind of um, manage it better with the counselling as well. And I think there needs to be kind of a change in how medication is viewed and given to people who are mentally ill or struggle with mental health. Because if you're given medication, the first lot might not work, and then it can be very disheartening when you pin your hopes on medication, to this one medication to make you feel better. Um, but yeah, I think it does need, and it's often viewed, as you said, it's an easy way for the NHS to treat people who are struggling because it's very cost effective, it's cheap, it doesn't take much time, um, and that's wrong really. It should be used not because it's easy, it should be used when the time is right and when it's the best thing to be used.
Yeah, definitely. One question I always ask on the podcast is what's missing in the space. I think there's something that you truly believe is missing, and that's obviously from a political point of view in regards to the Minister for Mental Health. So, explain that in more detail.
Yeah, so last year Labour had a cabinet minister for mental health, and Keir Starmer decided in the shadow cabinet, and Keir Starmer decided that he wanted to replicate what was in government, which didn't have a minister for mental health, and which was incredibly disappointing for a lot of people in the kind of mental health field. But after the election, the mental health brief is being looked after by Lord Merron, who's a member of the House of Lords, and she also has a brief of women's health and patient safety, which a lot of people, and I just think is totally inadequate. Mental health and mental illness it is a crisis in this country. Many people are losing their lives due to mental illness and through suicide. Suicide's up 6% year on year, which I think if it was any other illness, it would not. Something would be done about it. and a fully dedicated mental health minister in the cabinet is so important on so many levels. One, we need somebody around the cabinet table who can stand up for those who are struggling, can listen to the education secretary or health secretary talk about something, and can actually talk about the repercussions this will have on those who are struggling with their mental health. The funding for mental health takes up 20%, is 20% of cases in the NHS, yet only makes up 10% of the funding. So we need somebody at the cabinet table who's going to fight for those struggling with mental illness, and coordinate an adequate response to what is a crisis and a worsening crisis, which we don't currently have. I think it also devalues women's health and patient safety, which are two important things as well. And the fact that one person is doing it from the House of Lords doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think it was Ben Bradley, who was a MP last time, who was campaigning for a male minister, sort of the opposite of that. But it sounds like they've just bundled everything together anyway. So you can do that. But yeah, I think the short version is it's the true pandemic, right? I think the pandemic has only heightened and showcased more cases of mental health, and I guess the sheer lack of community and the other things that sort of came with lockdown has sort of amplified that. And like you say, the numbers speak for themselves on the tough statistic, but there are other statistics as well, like burnout and violence and other things that sort of are actually linked to poor mental health and mental illnesses. So yeah, it's something that I agree with. I think is something that needs to be looked at. Or is the minister the be all and end all? Is there something that the NHS can sort of look to do and put? I don't know. I don't know enough about it.
Yeah, I think for me, it's obviously wider than a minister. I kind of think there's a lot of people campaigning for different things, and one of the things that I didn't see many people campaigning for was the minister. And my hope would be that once we get a minister, there's somebody to take these these asks to. At the moment, you're taking it to a member of the House of Lords who doesn't have too much accountability and is looking after a massive brief. Whereas hopefully if we got a mental health minister, they can start to address across the government these things, because mental health has so many, and mental illness has so many different contributing factors that cover a whole range of different government departments. We need somebody who's in there coordinating this effort to take on the massive task of the true pandemic.
Yeah, definitely. I guess that's the voice, right, that starts to put the pressure on, which is interesting.
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, I think something like that is definitely needed. Paddy, it's been an absolute pleasure. I could speak to you for many hours, and I hope we do off camera for sure. But I will leave the final thoughts with you so you can have a wrap up. And also, if there's any way that anyone can get involved or wants to reach out, if there's any way that anyone wants to reach out to you, let them know in this sort of last little segment for yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. It's been really enjoyable. I love talking about mental health. It's my passion. But yeah, I think if you want to get involved, I'm Paddy Crump on LinkedIn, and I'm always looking to talk to more people, learn from more people around mental health, and just kind of change what's going on, because it makes me incredibly frustrated. But if you are struggling, then please reach out, men, women, but especially men. There's so much stigma around it. I promise you that reaching out is the first step and the most important step, and you won't regret it. There's people out there who really do care about what you're going through and really do want you to open up to them. And there's nothing to be ashamed of opening up. So yeah, let me, anybody get in contact if you want to learn more or get involved in the campaign. So Paddy Crump at LinkedIn or on Instagram.